Hi, welcome to another episode of Life's Beautiful Synergies. My name is Dr. Rachel Ann Behling, and in this podcast series, I bring you everything from experiences in IT to women in technology and everything in between. So join me for another episode of Life's Beautiful Synergies. So today's topic is something that's near and dear to my heart, but it is something that is not always something that you look forward to. And that's when you are anticipating that a meeting that you're going into or a conversation that you need to have, you're anticipating that there's going to be conflict, that there's going to be discussion, and there's quite possibly going to be a disagreement. So what are some of the things that you do to prepare yourself for that, to make sure that you step into that and have the best outcome, not only for yourself, but for the whole purpose of that conversation? So let me step back and give you just a couple of tips. Tip number one, and this cannot be underestimated, but give yourself a script, especially if kicking off the conversation is something that you're anticipating that you might stumble with, that you might miss a very critical point that needs to be said out loud, but also to make sure that you don't ramble, or equally as important, you don't chicken out on the delivery of something that may actually be hard for the other person to hear. So that's tip number one, is to write out that script and even line by line of what you're going to say. Tip number two is to practice. And this doesn't mean that every conversation that's going to be controversial or may have some conflict, that you need to come in feeling very well-versed and scripted and practiced, and that you sound like you've rehearsed it 15 times. That's not the intention. The intention is that you don't trip over your own hesitation to say some things that may be actually hard for you to say and may be equally hard for the other person to hear, but that you are able to speak fluently and not have too complex of words, not add too much data or too much details, because sometimes you're trying to oversell something, where actually being very simple and straight to the point will actually get you to a better outcome. Tip number two. So now tip number three is, first and foremost, make sure that the setting that you're going to have the conversation removes as much distractions as possible. So if this is a confrontation or a conflict that is better suited to not have a big audience, don't set yourself and the recipient of this conversation up for failure by having a big all audience that's going to add a whole bunch of extra noise to the conversation. So maybe this is a conversation that you need to have outside of normal work hours, maybe before, over coffee, or kind of off a normal meeting where you have a big audience. And then last but not least is making sure that you've thought through any of the other distractions that may take away from actually getting to the content and to the outcome that you're desiring. So be really clear about what outcome you're expecting at the end of that conversation. Because if it's simply to deliver something, make sure that that is what is well known when you're delivering the message. But if there's a decision that needs to be made or a behavior that needs to stop, make sure that you're very clear with yourself, but also with the person that you're delivering that information to. By following these tips, you will help yourself and the recipient of these kind of conversations feel less and less uncomfortable with these kind of uncomfortable topics, so that you can get to much better collaboration and communication, because everything in business and in your personal life is not going to always be easy things to hear or easy things to deliver. So let's take that topic one step further. So let's say you're in a meeting and you disagree or do not strongly agree with what's being said in the meeting, even if it's data or an opinion or a direction for a certain project or process that the direction of the meeting may be going in. So there is a right way, and sometimes there's a better way to professionally disagree or make sure that your voice or your opinion or your data can be put on record. So a couple things that you can do is, first and foremost, try to make sure that you understand the content that's going to be presented in the meeting before you show up. So this is where when you see a meeting on your calendar, don't just blindly accept the meeting invite, even though you know that it could be controversial. Make sure that you see the data before you go into that meeting if you can. So you have an opportunity with you and your team to review what's being presented, consume it, ask the presenter some questions so you're outside of that very social and very public stage to be asking those questions about the data. But second is, if you disagree, I want to encourage you to step out of your comfort zone, raise your hand, share your voice, and respectfully ask that, hey, I'm not 100% in agreement with where the direction is going. Could you please pause for a moment and walk me through the logic or the data to where you got to where you're making that recommendation? So instead of, sometimes we just want to bluntly stop the conversation and disagree just so that we're on record. I want to encourage you to address it from a continuing question perspective. So continue to ask that person that's on stage, hey, can you slow down for a minute? Can you walk me through the logic? Can you walk me through the data? Or can we have a separate meeting offline so you and I can talk about something that we might disagree with, if that's going to take the meeting down a rabbit hole? So these are just a few very small tips. One, to prepare before the meeting so that you're not having that dialogue in a session that they may be actually looking for a decision. And by you raising your hand and questioning the data or having some confrontation with the presenter, you may actually distract from getting to that decision. So these are just a couple tips that will help you to be able to make sure that your voice is heard in those kind of meetings, but that you stay moving the meeting in a positive direction, but also making sure that everybody that's in that meeting, along with yourself, agree with the data and the direction that that meeting is going. So now let's take the topic to a little bit closer between human to human. So we've talked about being in a meeting situation, and we've talked about being prepared for those meetings. But now let's talk about, you're in a situation where you've seen something that one of your peers or one of your stakeholders has done, and you have an opportunity to give them some meaningful feedback. What are some ways that you can do that will make it the most consumable for the person that you're trying to help? So the trick there is that your feedback is actually coming from a genuine place of trying to help that person either get past something that might have been an uncomfortable situation, or maybe it's something that could have helped them to be more effective in a meeting, in a situation, or to help to grow their career, both professionally or personally. So first and foremost, you need to be coming from a place of good intent. Okay? If you have some feedback and it is not from a place of good intent, I'm going to give you some very meaningful feedback. Do not share it. Because if your intention is not to help that other person, then sharing it might give something off your chest, but it will not actually help that person. So that's rule number one. Rule number two is think about what that person needs to hear, not what you need to say. So sometimes you might be like, oh my goodness, I used to make that mistake. I need to tell that person right away how to present better, talk less, talk more, be more better with their data, whatever that feedback may be. But always think about it, not from you giving them advice so that you sound smart or you sound like you're telling them how to do their job better, but what does that person actually need to hear from you in order for them to do better next time, for them to be more effective in their presentation, or maybe to manage their stakeholder or manage their peers or manage their boss in a little bit better way from something that you learned from. So think about that. But then the next step is, how do you structure your feedback for that person so that it's actually consumable and it doesn't sound like you're a know-it-all or that you're trying to boss them around because maybe they're not part of your team. But just think about how can you approach it, giving that person's personality, maybe where they are in the company, where they are in their professional career, and adjust yourself accordingly. So if you're giving feedback to a peer, you might want to be very mindful about how they will consume that feedback that you're about to give them, and think about how to adjust based on your own emotional intelligence, based about how you've seen that person consume feedback from someone else, in an audience, in a meeting, or from a stakeholder, and kind of mimic that based on how you've seen them accept feedback in the past. Similarly, if you're giving feedback to someone who may be a little bit more novice or a little bit newer in their professional career than you are, maybe that's a great opportunity to put on your mentoring or coaching hat and pull them aside and say, hey, I noticed that you were just in that meeting and you seemed a little bit uncomfortable when you got to certain parts of your data analysis or your proposal. Talk to me about what you've learned from that presentation and what you're thinking about doing differently. And maybe there's something that I can practice with you on, or maybe you'd like to bounce off me before you go back into that same call again. And so there might be different approaches based on who you're giving feedback to, but also your own emotional intelligence on how that person is probably going to be able to receive your feedback based on who they are and how you've seen them consume feedback in the past. These are all tips that are going to help you to be more effective in helping to lift up and raise up those around you if you just spend a little bit of time thinking about how that person will consume your feedback, and a little less time about what you think you need to say to that person in the moment. So as we shift from confrontation and feedback and anticipating tricky situations, now let's shift into just really basic communication. So as we're working through our careers and we are looking at all of the different diversity that's in our organizations, whether it's generational, whether it's tech versus non-tech and so forth, business versus IT versus manufacturing, often organizations have a mix of all of that. And so how do you adjust your communication style and your communication effectiveness based on sometimes even having multiple generations in the same workforce, in the same meetings? And so some advice that I would share is that always having that awareness of your audience, looking at how they're responding, looking at whether they're comfortable to have their cameras on, whether they're comfortable to be involved in chats or live streaming, or whether they're more comfortable being in a face-to-face call as opposed to being online and on camera. So there's a lot of things to be considering when you're in a work environment where you may have multiple generations and multiple different levels of comfortableness with both technology and how you communicate in the workplace. So just having that awareness and being very adaptive to it is going to be a significant contributor to how well you're able to communicate in today's workplace. Now, there are multiple strategies to help teams that are dealing with both co-located but also globally dispersed teams. Everything from figuring out how to have enough structure in the meetings so that both people that are co-located sitting at the same location, sitting right by each other, or someone that's dialing in and they're on the phone, they're on a call, maybe they're in a complete different time zone. So making sure that whoever is facilitating the meeting, whether it's you or someone else, is always thinking about how do you make sure that the people that are sitting in the conference room, as opposed to being online, have equal opportunity to have their voice heard and to be participating in the meeting. That is a very fundamental thing that we should be thinking about as we continue to do virtual, co-located, and globally located teams. Another tip is to make sure that there is an opportunity for everyone that is on the call, whether they're co-located, they're globally, that they all have an opportunity to sometimes present the meeting, facilitate the meeting, be the person that's just doing the data, so that not every single meeting, it's the same person that has the opportunity to be the facilitator. So oftentimes you may have an introvert or an extrovert, and you may want to rotate the duties of leading a call to really help the whole team feel more comfortable with all the different components. That helps our globally located teams feel more comfortable with all the nuances of having good communication in team meetings, project meetings, and so forth. So there is a sweet spot for managers to navigate when they're dealing between technical and non-technical teams. One of the most basic rule of thumbs is to be able to explain a technical situation, a technical release, any kind of technical content at a level that is simple enough for a non-technical person to understand just fundamentally what is trying to be said. And that not only helps the non-technical teams that might be involved in a meeting, in a conference, in a presentation, but equally as important, it helps to encourage our more technical teams to step outside of our comfort zones and take something that is usually spoken at a very technical level and break it down to the most fundamental, because it helps your comprehension, but it also helps the non-technical and technical teams to speak in a common language so there's no misunderstanding of what is intended to be discussed or presented or to be agreed upon in the meeting. So whenever you have a communication that needs to go to that broad of an audience, making sure that it is always at a level that is understood throughout every line of the business. So a question that I get often asked is, what is the most effective way to give constructive feedback without making the recipient of that feedback feel bad or feel discouraged? So some tips that I often give is, first and foremost, that the feedback is about the activity or the action, and it is not about the person. So before you give feedback to someone with the intention of helping them to grow or develop, or just giving them feedback that they really need to take an action on, is to make sure that it is not perceived as being personal or about something that is beyond their control to fix. That is not a personality feedback, right? That it is an action that they took or a behavior that they presented that they need feedback on in order to make adjustments so that they're more effective in their professional career or in the environment that they're in. Now, on the flip side of that, say that you're the one that just received that kind of constructive feedback. So what are some ways that you can show that you've consumed the feedback and that you're using it for an opportunity for growth in personal and professional development? Number one, making sure that you reach out or you respond to whoever gave you that feedback within less than 24 hours. After you've had a chance to have your emotional reaction, to feel bad about yourself, whatever is going to be your reaction, but within 24 hours to be able to step back and be able to legitimately say, hey, Skylar, I really appreciate that you gave me this feedback. These are the three things, after I've had a chance to consume your feedback, these are the three things that I've thought of that I can actually do to consume what you gave me and actually do a better job the next time that I'm in X, Y, or Z of a situation that you and I were discussing. That way you're showing, one, I consumed it. Two, I'm embracing it. Three, I don't disagree with you. And four, I have a path forward that's going to help me grow. And last but not least, thank the person for having the bravery and the honesty and caring enough about you to be brave enough to give you that feedback. Now, the role of timing can never be underemphasized in both giving and receiving feedback. Let me give you a few examples. So if you're giving constructive feedback and it is about a particular behavior in a particular moment of time, the longer you wait to give that feedback, the less relevant and the less remembered the recipient of that feedback is going to be. So let's say, for instance, you're giving someone feedback on how they presented data in a meeting and they did X, Y, and Z behavior, if they're in the middle of that meeting and they're going to go back on stage, think about, should I ping them right now and say, hey, you should be in presentation mode. I can see all your monitors and show me your personal IMs. So the more relevant the timing is for them to be able to consume that feedback, sometimes they might question like, Rachel, why did you wait until the end of the meeting where I could have pivoted if you had told me right then? The timing is equally as important. Is sometimes you need to let them get through whatever they're doing, because in that moment, they just need to get through what they're going through. And it would be more impactful if you waited until your next one-on-one, or you waited until it was a calmer time, and to be able to pull them aside and say, hey, I know that last week was really crazy, but I noticed that there was a couple times that you showed up to meetings and you were late, right? That you didn't look prepared and these things were going on. And I know the behind the scenes, what was going on. So I wanted to sit down with you and kind of talk about when you have those crazier projects and deliverables and due dates, maybe there's some things you want to bounce some ideas off of me. And I thought maybe we could spend an hour this afternoon and kind of go through some of those. So you got the timing is really, really important. Is your feedback something that they need to correct right here, right now, so that they can pivot and still have a successful outcome? Or is it something a little bit more behavioral or preparation wise that would actually sink in and resonate with them if it was during more of a peacetime where you could actually talk through some of the things? So timing is so, so important, whether you're delivering it or you're receiving it. It really depends on what is best for the person in order to make that feedback the most meaningful. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Life's Beautiful Synergies. In this episode, you've come along with me on this journey to talk about different tips and tricks and best practices on having constructive feedback in conversations, tips and tricks and ways that you can improve your communication, both inside of meetings, but also when delivering and receiving feedback that will help you and those around you lift up and have a better journey through this professional life together. I'd love for you to join me as we go through more episodes. So join me on social media, through my podcasts, as well as my website. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode of Life's Beautiful Synergies.